coming today, and thank you very much for a good introduction of myself. And I'm very pleased to read my paper about lesser known Japanese Schindler, Dr. Setsuzo Kotsuji. My paper is just like 40 minutes, so that after that I'll accept your questions if you have. Dr. Timothy Snyder of Yale University argues in his recent book, Black Earth, The Holocaust as History and Warning, 2015. The claim of right to destroy the world in the name of profits for a few people reveals an important conceptual problem. Rights mean restraint. Each person is an end in himself or herself. The significance of a person is not exhausted by what someone else wants from him or her. Individuals have the right not to be defined as parts of a planetary conspiracy or a doomed race. Understanding the Holocaust is our chance, perhaps our last one, to preserve humanity. Perhaps it is true that to save one life is to save the world. But the converse is not true. Saving the world does not restore a single lost life. The evil that was done to the Jews, to each Jewish child, woman, and man cannot be undone. Yet it can be recorded and it can be understood. Indeed, it must be understood so that its like can be prevented in the future. As he suggests here, we have to learn from the Holocaust and consider it a warning, even when we examine the intentions of Holocaust rescuers. Because there are great saviors who did rescue Jews, but for their own interests, like Oscar Schindler at the outset. Chune Sugihara, Japanese consul in Lithuania in 1940, rescued about 6,000 Polish Jews by issuing Japanese transit visas as a risk of his life and even that of his family. In fact, his name was on the Nazi assassination list. Sugihara described the source of his righteous actions in his memoir as coming from my sense of humanity, from love for my fellow human beings. These remarks resound with Snyder's conclusive assertion. Dr. Setsuzo Kotsuji is another less-known Japanese civilian Holocaust rescuer. Setsuzo Kotsuji was born in 1899, 1 year before Chune Sugihara, as the son of Shinto priest, who descended from a long line of Shinto priests in the famous Shinto Shimogamo Shrine in Kyoto. From childhood, he was expected by a Shinto priest to be a Shinto priest. However, instead, he came to be interested in the study of Biblical Hebrew and eventually became a Japanese Jew. Before I examine Kotsuji's life more closely, I would like to briefly introduce Japanese history and its religion in order to make clear Kotsuji's particular upbringing and his family tradition of Shintoism. Shintoism is the indigenous religion of the people of Japan. It is defined as a religion focused on ritual practices to be carried out diligently to establish a connection between present-day Japan and its ancient past. Shinto practices were first recorded and codified in the written historical records of the Kojiki and Nihon Shoki in the 8th century. Still, these earliest Japanese writings do not refer to a unified Shinto religion, but rather to a collection of native beliefs and mythology. The Kojiki is a collection of myths concerning the origin of the 4 home islands of Japan and the Japanese gods known as kami. Along with the Nihon Shoki, the myths contained in the Kojiki are part of the inspiration behind many practices. Later, the myths were reappropriated for Shinto practices including the misogi purification ritual. In many ways, the Kojiki and the Nihon Shoki have several affinities with the Old Testament. They are comparable to the world of Old Testament. Most probably, as a little boy, Kotsuji unconsciously felt some similarities between his own upbringing in traditional Shinto belief and the world of Old Testament. Shinto is the largest religion in Japan, practiced by nearly 80% of the population. Yet, only a small percentage of these identify themselves in surveys as Shintoists. In Japan, most of Japanese, without belonging to an institutional Shinto religion, attend Shinto shrines and beseech gods on many occasions, such as the celebrations of childbirth, marriage ceremonies, and prayer for the success of the entrance exams for famous schools or universities. Since there are no formal rituals to become a member of folk Shinto, Shinto membership is often estimated by counting those who join organized Shinto sects. Shinto has 81,000 shrines and 85,000 priests in the country. In 1882, after many years of careful planning and hard work, a committee of Protestant missionaries and Japanese Christian converts completed a Japanese translation of the Old Testament. Even now, Jews are a tiny ethnic and religious group in Japan, presently consisting of only 2,000 people. Few Japanese, even among academic people, are familiar with the Old Testament and the New Testament, or can tell the differences between Judaism and Christianity. As a result, Japan had no traditional anti-Semitism until Nazi ideology and propaganda influenced a small number of Japanese military personnel in the 1930s and 40s. Saved by Mr. Sugihara, about 5,000 Polish Jewish refugees came to Kobe with transit visas that would allow them to stay in Japan for only 15 days. The man to whom the Jewish community in Kobe turned was the Hebrew scholar Setsuzo Kotsuji. Dr. Kotsuji was informed about what Mr. Sugihara did for Jews against the order of Japanese Foreign Minister Matsuoka. Dr. Kotsuji helped with the refugees' daily needs, repeatedly negotiated with the foreign ministry as well as local governments at his considerable personal expense to win visa extensions for them, and successfully arranged for the departure of nearly all of them to new destinations by the fall of 1941. Dr. Kotsuji also fought against persecution of the Jews by writing books and giving lectures throughout the country. In the fall of 1944, this resulted in his being arrested and tortured for violating wartime speech restrictions. Thanks to a quick-witted friend, he won release, but fearing for his safety, he moved with his family to Manchuria in June 1945, just before the end of the war. He greeted the end of the war there, aided by some of the Jews whom he himself had helped save. After the war, he converted to Judaism and found his final resting place in Jerusalem. Wow. I'd like to investigate why Dr. Setsuzo Kotsuji dared to risk his life to save many Jewish refugees from Poland, who were first rescued by Chune Sugihara, and at the age of 60, what brought him to his decision to be a Japanese Jew and to accept circumcision in Jerusalem. To examine Kotsuji's life will contribute to the understanding his strong attachment to Judaism and certain similarities between Japanese religious feelings and Judaism. Dr. Kotsuji's memoir, From Tokyo to Jerusalem, published in 1964, starts with a moment when he became a Japanese Jew. It was September 20th, 1959, I lay on the operating table of Shaarei Tzedek Hospital in Jerusalem. Dr. Nahum Cook stood at my side, a scalpel in his hand, prepared to perform the ritual of circumcision. What am I doing here? I asked myself. I'm 60 years old. A Japanese, the descendant of a long line of Shinto lords, priest of the imperial household of Japan. What brought me to this place? Why did I come to this one spot in the world, surmounting such odds as few men have surmounted in a lifetime? End quote. Unlike Sugihara, Kotsuji seems to be considered a Bissell Michiganer, a little crazy Japanese. He often asked himself about his unbridled enthusiasm for the study of the Talmud and biblical Hebrew. Joseph Edelberg published a book entitled The Japanese and the 10 Lost Tribes of Israel, published in 1980. And by studying the similarities between the Hebrew and Japanese alphabets, tries to prove that Japanese are descendants of the 10 lost tribes. If we accept Edelberg's assumption, Kotsuji might have been a descendant of the 10 lost tribes. But of course, it isn't so simple. When Kotsuji was a little boy, at the beginning of the 20th century, there was no Jewish religion in Japan. One day, Kotsuji found the Bible in a second-hand store, a Japanese translation by a Japanese-American missionary group. His Bible reading ended up causing a big change in the course of his life. He felt greatly enhanced by reading the Psalms. Late one evening, while I was rehearsing this psalm over and over, I was led into a state of religious rapture and felt myself really at the city of God. Even though he was born a descendant of a long, illustrious line of Shinto priests, Kotsuji reached the point when he could not obey the traditional ceremony of the duty of lighting a sacred fire as a levered altar, and he wept bitterly. Seeing his spiritual turmoil, his parents worried about him. In the end, they showed a deep understanding for Kotsuji's passion for new religious vigor towards the Bible. After careful reading of the Old Testament and the New Testament from the age 13 to 15, Kotsuji came to a conclusion. I was convinced Jesus intended only to be a reformer, and he died as Jesus, the Jew. I felt that to be a Christ was far from his intention. His father, a Shinto priest, allowed him to follow his wish under the one condition of keeping his family tradition and heritage. You may go ahead with your new faith. Only remember your ancestors, to honor them and be proud of your great heritage. In 1916, Setsuzo Kotsuji decided to study the Bible at American Presbyterian College, Tokyo Meiji Gakuin in Tokyo. And at last, he became a minister, still harboring some doubts about Christianity, such as the divinity of Christ. In 1923, at the age of 24 years old, he married a beautiful Japanese Christian woman, Mineko Iwane. Then, after almost 10 years experience as a minister in Japan, Kotsuji made his mind up to study the Old Testament at Auburn Theological Seminary in New York. After studying there, he continued at the University of California at Berkeley and received a PhD in 1931. The title of his dissertation was The Origin and Evolution of the Semitic Alphabets. Dr. Kotsuji compares the West and the East like this. The basic difference I feel between the Western world and the East is the Western habit of analyzing, verbalizing, and abstracting. This kind of thought process makes Western science possible. But it seems to me that there is a loss of some of the beauties of life. The Eastern mind works figuratively, The Orient is intuitive, subjective. Where the West is prosaic, the East is poetic. Where the West analyzes, the East symbolizes. Western poetry, for example, is inclined to be long, narrative, and explicit. Eastern poetry is very short and in dialect, implying much by saying little. It is understandable, then, why the Old Testament, with its strong Oriental mystery and symbolism, fired my Japanese mind, while the directness of the New Testament failed to strike a spark. I left America as a Jew more than a Christian. As one of the few Japanese Yiddishists, I can sympathize with Dr. Kotsuji's intuitive reflection upon the distinction between the West and East. In fact, this is the reason why I'm here today. I'm very inspired. I was very inspired by Kotsuji's life, and with similarity I found myself. It is understandable how strongly he was attracted to the Old Testament, despite the fact of being the son of a Shinto priest. In 1931, he became a Hebrew professor in Japan at Okayama Gakuin University. Because he caught typhoid fever, he had to leave the university in 1933, and his family again suffered from poverty. There is rather a comical episode about his innocent zeal for biblical Hebrew in his memoir, From Tokyo to Jerusalem. To pass the time in the quarantine hospital, he rehearsed Hebrew verses hour after hour, but he did not do the same with his English. Not long after he was discharged from the hospital, he tested his English and Hebrew by reading aloud to his wife. "Mineko, my English doesn't sound right to me. Listen, please." She listened while I read a bit. No, you used to read it better." She paused. "For God's sake, what about your Hebrew?" I snatched up a Hebrew Bible and began to read. Her features relaxed. "Yes, your pronunciation is as good as ever." Hearing this comment from his wife, he felt relieved, even though his wife understood neither English nor Hebrew. His zeal for Hebrew shows his absent-mindedness, so that he is entitled to be called a Luftmensch, someone with his head in the cloud, or even a Shemiel, a simpleton in Yiddish. He first encountered Jews while working for the South Manchuria Railroad Company from 1938 till 1940. In order to understand why Dr. Setsuzo Kotsuji could become so influential, we have to trace history back to his close relationship with the foreign minister Yosuke Matsuoka, who was convicted as a war criminal after the World War II. From a variety of causes, the stories of Chune Sugihara, the Vice Consul of Lithuania, in 1940, and Dr. Setsuzo Kotsuji overlapped in intriguing ways. In 1938, Yosuke Matsuoka, then president of the South Manchuria Railway, requested Dr. Kotsuji to become the advisor of Jewish affairs in Manchuria. In the beginning, Dr. Kotsuji refused, but in the end, he was persuaded by Matsuoka's earnest entreaty and worked for Matsuoka for 2 years, until Mr. Matsuoka became foreign minister in 1940, at a critical moment of Japanese history. Matsuoka was a man who did not allow Mr. Sugihara to issue transit visas to Jewish refugees without money and destinations. In the book by Mr. Sugihara's wife, Yukiko Sugihara's Visas for Life, she criticizes Foreign Minister Matsuoka, who did not allow her husband to issue visas. As a result, the minister became the target of criticism by the Jews, but Kotsuji, as a close friend of Matsuoka, supported the future foreign minister from a totally different perspective. Kotsuji favorably evaluates Matsuoka's attitude towards Jews. It is hard to prove what kind of person Matsuoka was, but we can estimate his unbiased attitude toward Jewish immigrants from a speech at a private banquet on December 31st, 1940. New Foreign Minister Matsuoka told a group of Jewish business people, "I am the man responsible for the alliance with Hitler, but nowhere have I promised that we would carry out his anti-Semitic policies in Japan. This is not simply my personal opinion. It is a position of Japan, and I have no compunction about announcing it to the world." Mr. Matsuoka's declaration is based on the official Japanese policies toward Jews in 1938. The highest policy-making body in the Japanese government, consisting of the Prime Minister, Foreign Minister, and the Ministers of the Army, Navy, and Treasury, came to the following conclusion on December 6th in 1938. Number one, Jews living in Japan, Manchuria, and China are to be treated fairly and in the same manner as other foreign nationals. No special effort to expel them is to be made. Number two, Jews entering Japan, Manchuria, and China are to be dealt with on the basis of existing immigration policies pertaining to other foreigners. Number three, no special effort to attract Jews to Japan, Manchuria, or China is to be made. However, exceptions may be made for businessmen and technicians with utility value for Japan. This was a background when Japanese Schindler, Mr. Sugihara, issued 2,139 Japanese transit visas to Polish Jews who stampeded to the Japanese consulate in Lithuania from July 29th till August 28th in 1940. Japanese people traditionally did not share anti-Semitism with the rest of the world. Many military officers were well informed about the Jewish-American banker Jacob Schiff's great financial contribution to the Japanese government in the Russo-Japanese War from 1904 to 1905. Through his close relationship with Mr. Matsuoka, Dr. Kotsuji showed a deep understanding and respect toward Matsuoka. Kotsuji writes, "Yosuke Matsuoka, the president of the South Manchuria Railway and the man to whom I was directly responsible, was a badly understood man. Short and stocky, he wore a heavy mustache and projected an attitude of self-importance. But he nonetheless was basically a good-hearted man. It is true that he played a major role in persuading Japan to sign the anti-communist agreement with Germany. Nonetheless, his attitude toward the Jewish people was correct and even warm to some extent. He had spent part of his boyhood in America, had studied at the University of Oregon, and was friendly to the United States. He fervently opposed war with America until the very last." While working in Manchuria as an advisor for Jewish affairs, Kotsuji made friends with Dr. Abraham Kaufman, an influential Jewish medical doctor in Manchuria, and with other Jewish leaders. At the Third Far Eastern Jewish Conference held on December 23, 1939, Kotsuji gave a short speech entirely in biblical Hebrew. Through the 2-year contact with many influential Jews living in Manchuria, he began to feel closer to the Jewish people and the study of Judaism through his personal contact with them. There is a witness account about Kotsuji's selfless efforts to help Jewish refugees during the Second World War by Rabbi Zerach Walhaftik, born in Volkovsk in the Russian Empire in 1906. In 1941, Walhaftik and his family traveled east from Lithuania to Japan with a transit visa issued by Sugihara. On June 5, 1941, the Walhaftiks left Yokohama on the Japanese ocean liner Hikawamaru, and on June 17th, they landed in Vancouver, Canada. During World War 2, Rabbi Valhaftik convinced the Japanese vice consul in Kaunas, Lithuania, Junior Sugihara, to issue visas for the entire Mia Yeshiva, including professors of Talmudists or rabbis, about 2,000 yeshiva bocher, yeshiva students were rescued. By issuing thousands of visas to the Jewish refugees, Junior Sugihara saved thousands of lives and families from the Nazi, who occupied first Poland and then Lithuania. After World War II, Valhaftik taught Jewish law at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem from 1948 to 1963. In 1951, he was appointed Deputy Minister of Religions in the Fourth Israeli government. After the 1961 elections, the Fifth Knesset, he was appointed Minister of Religions, a position he held until 1974. In 1981, he retired from the Knesset. Valhaftik was among the founders of Bar-Ilan University. According to Zolach, Valhaftik's Refugee and Survivor Rescue Attempts During the Holocaust, published in 1984. The total number of Jewish refugees who came to Japan from July 1940 to May 1941 was 4,664. Rabbi Valhaftik also became acquainted with Kotsuji and wrote favorably about him. Though Kotsuji lived in Kamakura, close to Tokyo, he came all the way to Kobe to see Rabbi Valhaftik. They discussed Jewish and Japanese history and religion, but the communication was difficult for them. Rabbi Valhaftik's English was quite limited, and Dr. Kotsuji knew only some chapters of Psalms in Biblical Hebrew, but no Yiddish, oy vey. According to Kotsuji, the Nazis sent some SS men to Japan, including Joseph Albert Meisinger, a German SS colonel in the Gestapo, also known as the Butcher of Warsaw. They organized a political economic association called Seikei Gakkai, and it published a journal called Researches into the Secret World Power, a vehicle for translations of anti-Jewish pamphlets. As a leading scholar of the Hebrew Bible, Dr. Kotsuji traveled all around Japan to give a series of lectures to deny the propaganda of anti-Semitism based on the protocols of the Elders of Zion. I was among the speakers, and I took advantage of the opportunity in government circles. I began by pointing out that Nazi notion of Rassenschande, racial shame, was absurd, since no civilized nation in the modern world is composed of a single original race. I pointed out why Hitler was so interested in promoting anti-Semitism in Japan, and added what other details I knew. As a result of his activities, the military police kept an eye on Dr. Kotsuji, and finally he was arrested and tortured. But he was saved miraculously by his old friend, Lieutenant Yoshinori Shirahama, with whom Kotsuji had become acquainted during his stay in Manchuria. In this way, Dr. Kotsuji risked his life for what he did for Jewish people. Under these terrible conditions, Dr. Kotsuji became suspected of being a spy for Jews. Later, his name was on the list of those to be assassinated by the military police, and no one could guarantee his and his family's lives. Just before the end of the war, they left Japan for Harbin, where he could meet his reliable Jewish friends. His decision to risk his life as a Japanese for the Jews is astonishing. Taking the dangerous situation facing him into consideration, Kotsuji's determination to escape to Manchuria was quite reasonable. As expected, Kotsuji and his family were received warmly by his Jewish friends in Harbin and stayed there a year till the end of the war. The city was filled with many ethnic groups: Japanese, Manchurians, Russians, Koreans, Mongolians, and other nationalities. The population was almost 1 million. Manchuria remained a relatively prosperous place until the very last days of the war. Dr. Abraham Kaufman, the leader of the Jewish community, was the director of the Jewish hospital and president of the Jewish bank. He was suspected by the Japanese military police because he was well connected with Westerners. One day, Dr. Kaufman was taken to the Japanese military station and was interrogated. Because Dr. Kaufman could speak Russian, he was suspected of being a Russian sympathizer. Hearing about this incident from Kaufman's son, Kotsuji bravely visited the military base and saved him from his difficulties. After that, Kotsuji became a frequent visitor to Dr. Kaufman's house, ignoring the risk of arrest, while Jews refrained from visiting him for the fear of being suspected themselves. Dr. Kaufman was very grateful for Kotsuji's visits. Just after the end of the war, Manchuria was thrown into turmoil, with Russian soldiers looting, and it lasted till the Chinese communists came into power. In 1946, the few Japanese remaining in the Japanese colony were finally repatriated to Japan under the control of American armies. With the help of many Jews in Harbin, Kotsuji's family could safely return to Japan. Now, conclusion. As Professor Timothy Snyder argues, without conscious awareness, it is difficult for all of us to practice human goodness under devastating conditions. Most of us would like to think that we possess the qualities of moral instinct and human goodness. Perhaps we imagine that we would be rescuers in some future catastrophe. Yet, if states were destroyed, local institutions corrupted, and economic incentives directed toward murder, few of us would behave well. We have to realize that we might not act with moral instinct and human goodness if we do not deepen our sympathy toward different races through learning about and minimalizing racial prejudices. Like Kotsuji's uncontrollable passion for the Hebrew Bible and Judaism, I have been deeply involved with American Jewish and Yiddish literature studies for the last 40 years. My academic interest hopefully leads me to a better understanding of the Jewish culture and religion. As mentioned in the first place, there is almost no direct interaction between Judaism and Japanese people. As a result, we have never been anti-Semitic, except for a few military officers and politicians during the war. Still, it is not enough. We have to elevate our interest in Jewish people and its culture in order to save ourselves from being influenced by misinformation and easily ignited to form anti-Semitic feelings. As a Japanese educator, I try to implant a correct understanding about Jewish people and Jewish culture into Japanese minds through lectures and publishing books. This is what I have learned from the study of Kotsuji's personal history and from my long study of Jewish American literature and Yiddish literature. I believe that this is the power of academia and education. Thank you very much. Do you have any questions? Yes, please.
I have two questions. I'll
Yes.
ask one now and then wait when other people ask questions.
Yes.
Did all the refugees leave Japan before 1941? Were some of them still there after the war
Yes.
started?
Small
And if
number of
so,
people, yeah,
what
try to
happened to
stay
them?
in Japan.
What happened to
Yeah,
them who
in
are still
fact,
there?
mainly in Kobe, because there was a Kehila,
There's
a Jewish
Kehila,
community
yeah. I
in
wrote
Kobe,
about it.
so that they tried to stay, but not many people.
Did they live through the war?
Yeah, they left of Canada for the United States and China as well, and Australia.
After 41?
Yes.
Can I ask my other question?
Mhm.
Sure. How many Japanese Jews are there in Japan?
2,000.
About 2,000. Yeah,
200?
most of them, yes, most of them are business people. So, of course, half of them,
Not Jewish people from abroad, but Japanese.
yeah, more than half, I imagine that more than half are from Israel on business. Yes, so many Israeli people now in Tokyo and Osaka, Kansai area.
These are Israelis. I mean Japanese like Dr. Kotsuji who converted. How many converts to Judaism from Japan?
Well, just few.
What about the Bikoyas?
Makuya,
Yeah.
yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't.
Makuya is a name for the Jewish groups who established their identity as friendship to Israelis. They have a headquarters there in Israel. I visited there once, and but they are regarded as a bit of Michigan because it's that's too much. They do a festival there,
Yeah.
very traditional festival of Japanese there in Israel. It's very close to the kibbutz there.
But
So-
they didn't convert.
No. Yes.
Is there a list of names that would say Basugihara?
Yes, there is a list of Sugihara. Yes,
Where
it-
can I check
Oh,
it out?
quite easy. If you go to, I think even the internet you can access.
Oh.
Can I?
it.
Okay.
Yes, or Sugihara Museum in Gifu, and you can access that.
Excellent.
Yes, yes.
You've been very generous in your description about other people and very, very inspirational, but I know nothing about what really inspired you initially. I know how prolific you've been, but talk a little bit about your own emotional connection to this
Yeah, I
field
think
of
so.
study.
With Mr. What? With Dr. Kotsuji or
No, you.
Yiddish.
myself? Yes.
Could you repeat the question, please?
I think we need a mic for
I'm
questions.
sorry, I have a soft voice. My question was, we know so much about the people he talked about now, but I'd like to know more about his own emotional connection. So I'm very interested in what inspired you, what motivated you, what made you really even want to pursue this field of study,
Yes.
because it's extraordinary and very, very obviously unique.
Yes. Yeah, that was when I was 22 years old. I was a graduate student in Japan, and one of my professors, American professors, recommended me to read one novel that is Shosha, published in 1978 by Isaac Bashevis Singer. And that was the first encounter with a Jewish and Judaism, you see. But from the first page, I was inspired. I was very, very, surprising in a sense. I don't know. I could not understand why so. Just like falling in love, So because I could see myself in the first page and the second pages, and I can sympathize with the main character of the novel, Aaron Gradinger. That's a character of that story. But anyway, so after I wrote a paper on that, because that was an assignment, I have to get credits for that. So that I wrote a paper on that. Then just after that, I decided to translate all the novel. That's an English translation. So from English translation to Japanese, and I did. I completed that, even though I could not publish that. No publishers were not interested in my poor translation. But anyway, that's a good start. And since then, I became more and more interested in Judaism and Jewish literature, American Jewish literature, not Yiddish. At the time, I did not know. But several years later, some other professor advised me, why don't you start studying Yiddish in Oxford. You know, they have a very good program there. So I thought, Verboschnis, why not? So that I challenged me. It was very challenging to me, of course, because I did not know any Hebrew letters, and my Bobby did not speak Yiddish. And so it's hard, in fact. But you know, now it's worth doing that. I feel it, because without the learning of Yiddish, maybe I cannot feel that, you know, kind of a feelings of Judaism or Jewish people. So I feel right now, I feel very satisfied with what I did. But that's my first encounter with Judaism and Jewish literature. So mainly from Isaac Bashevis Singer. And I don't know whether I told you or not, but it's very, very funny story which I wrote about in a Jewish Yiddish magazine. You know, after I started Yiddish learning, and at the time I was an associate professor at some university, my university, yes. And I have received a letter from my readers of my books. And she says in her book, you know, I am a great reader of your books. I'm very interested in I.B. Singer myself. By the way, my mom is a grandson of I.B. Singer. You know, she's Japanese. They live in Tokyo now.
How is she a grandson?
Well, Israel Zamil is the only son of I.B. Singer, and his son lives in Tokyo.
Wow.
Yes.
I'm
It's very interesting. So that, yes, yes. And what's more, 2 weeks later, I got a letter once again from her, a Japanese person, you know, a Japanese lady, and she asked me, why don't you meet my father-in-law, Israel Zamil? They are planning to come to Japan, so that can I take them to your house? And they came to my place, you know, to my surprise. Though I did not have any chance to meet I.B. Singer while he was alive. But just before that, I had a dream. And in my dream, I.B. Singer came to my dream and talked about literature and so on and so forth, you know. That was very, very interesting. Sehr ciekawe, you know, for me, you know. So that I was very impressed. And just after a week, you know, after that, you know, after my dream, just a week, I got a letter from a Japanese lady, something about that. So that I believe that, you know, I.B. Singer led me to his family. Still, I believe that way. It's very, very interesting. Yes.
It
So-
sounds like a Singer novel.
Yes, thank
really
you.
does.
I will write, and it will be a bestseller in some future. Yes. Could you come up here? Yes.
So first of all, thank you so much for the really informative lecture. So I just want to ask you a very quick question because I just wondering like how do you find yourself maybe relate to the whole question like how do you find yourself immersed into the Yiddish culture and then translate all of the elements from maybe from your feeling of in Yiddish culture into another language, maybe in Japanese or some other languages. Because for me personally, I experienced with the same similar situation like you. Like I came from Vietnam, I immersed myself into American culture or learning like Spanish literature, and then sometimes I found really difficult like to overcome that challenge. Like, can you elaborate more about your experience and how do you translate that into the emotion, like emotional?
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, maybe I have to repeat what I said right now, but Dr. Kotsuji maybe had similar feelings with me, but I could feel very close to the Judaism through people, and this is also part of that, you know, through the people and through the language. You know, before this lecture, you know, some of you talk to me in Mamalashan, in Yiddish, you know, I could feel something, you know, something, you know.
Feels differently, doesn't it?
Yes, I cannot learn that from books. So that this sounds, you know, in a different accents, of course,
I think it's
from
belonging.
Eulen.
I think it's belonging.
Yes, yes. So that's very, very, you know, right choice for me to have started Yiddish learning, because without that, I cannot feel that. And what's more, I think my main interest was in the first place in Isaac Bashevis Singer, as I told you, Shosha, published in 1978. I really cannot explain what happened in my heart,
Transformation.
but still, you know, very strong emotion I got, and I was really inspired by his world, as Dr. Kotsuji was inspired by Bible, Old Testament. You see, because I guess that, you know, there are similarities between Old Testament, or there's a world of Old Testament, and the world of Kojiki. That is a collection of mythology about Japanese gods, and same, you know, very similar stories you can find in the Kojiki and Nihon Shoki. That is the chronology of gods in Japan, and also the Old Testament. You know, you read a lot of interesting episodes like Jacob's story, and you know, and Isaac's, and so on and so forth. You know, similar stories we can find in the Kojiki, Japanese chronology of myth. You know. So that maybe I learned, as a child, I learned some essence of that kind of mythology I have, and I found some similarities in I.B. Singer's writings. See, that's the reason why I was attracted. Maybe, but I cannot tell, you know, I don't know about myself.
I think it was meant to happen.
Yes, but failed.
Exactly.
Somebody mentioned to me about 2 weeks ago that the Shema is a haiku. Does it make sense?
Shema.
The prayer Shema Israel,
Shema.
Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad is a haiku.
Oh, maybe so, yeah.
I was trying
It's
to
very poetic,
count
yes.
it and
It's
see
very
if
poetic.
it has the same.
And not prosaic.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah, maybe I never thought about that, so.
I'm sorry,
Question.
Yes.
Going back to the history of Japan.
Yes.
Okay. How you explain the duality that these some Japanese people support in a human sense to Jews, and in another hand we're so racist against Korean, Chinese, Philippine. How you explain that? Or maybe were also some people in Japan that were against that and helped Korean or Chinese or Filipino people.
I see. Okay. That's a very hard question, you know, harder than the Yiddish itself, I think. But I think in general, we had some prejudices against the Koreans and Chinese people. Some of them, you know, brought to Japan by the military force and so forth. So it's a bad relationship, especially Koreans. So that I think many Japanese, it's no more, but you know, in the olden time, I think we Japanese had some kind of a priority complex towards other Asians, especially Koreans. That's the reason why we, you know, try to segregate ourselves from Koreans. But that's not my field, so that I'm sorry. I try to confine to Kotsuji's story and Yiddish. I'm sorry. I'm not embellish the Japanese history. I don't intend to do that. But I'm a specialist in Yiddish literature and Jewish literature. So I don't try to cover everything. Sorry. Yes.
Do you find that Japanese students are interested in American Jewish literature?
Oh yes. Yes. In fact, you know, many students are interested in especially my lecture. Because, you know, they understand that that's a part of American literature.
Yes.
And it's a very important part of an American literature, Jewish literature. Of course, affected by the Russian literature and German literature, of course. But still, because through the study of American literature, and especially Jewish American literature, they can learn about the history of Jewish people in Mizrach Europa, that is in the Eastern European countries. It's very, very interesting, and it's quite inspiring to the Japanese people and Japanese students. So that I try to connect, present American Jewish writers and the history, their historical background, so that it makes try to make it more interesting to the Japanese students. Even though, in the beginning it's hard for them to understand what is Jew and what is Judaism, what is that? And it's even, as I told you, even the Japanese scholars, ordinary scholars, do